It was the scent of baked peaches that struck me first, soft and warm, like something from another life. Then came the sound of someone's guitar spilling out from a nearby stall, playing a tune that felt vaguely familiar. I wasn't even looking for her. I hadn't thought about her, not really, for months, maybe longer. But there she was, just past the rows of sunflowers and jars of local honey, standing by a basket of persimmons. She hadn't changed much. Hair a little shorter, posture a little straighter. But her stillness, that calm, grounded stillness, was the same. It was the kind of quiet she used to bring into a room without trying. The kind I once built my evenings around. She turned slightly, saw me, no smile, no surprise, just a nod. And I nodded back, as if we were nothing more than polite strangers who'd maybe met once in line for coffee. Not lovers, not the people who once fell asleep wrapped in each other's laughter. Just two quiet lives passing, like autumn wind brushing across a field. I didn't walk over. She didn't either. Maybe we both understood that whatever we had lived between us didn't belong to this day anymore. Still, something stayed behind in that moment. Not longing, not even sorrow, just ache. The kind that slips into your chest and makes itself comfortable. Not loud, not sharp, but steady. We parted ways without words, but the silence followed me home. And as I peeled the sticker off a bag of apples I didn't remember choosing, I realized sometimes the deepest heartbreaks don't come from dramatic goodbyes. They come from the quiet recognition that the person you once loved most now passes you like a shadow in morning light. The first time I saw her, she was stirring sugar into a chipped mug at a roadside diner just off Highway 12. It was the kind of place that smelled like burnt toast and fried eggs, where the vinyl booth stuck to your legs in summer and the waitress called everyone hun. She was sitting 2 stools down, hair in a loose braid, no makeup. She had that quiet look of someone who'd gotten used to carrying too much. Not in a dramatic way, just practiced. I had stopped in for a coffee on my way back from my father's funeral. I wasn't ready to go home yet. Didn't want to be asked how I was holding up. Didn't want to feel how empty the house felt now that it didn't smell like his aftershave and old paperbacks. She glanced over when the waitress poured my refill. I offered a nod, and she gave a tired kind of smile, like her heart was out of practice, but still polite. Turns out, she'd been coming to that diner every Saturday since her divorce. Said it helped her feel anchored. Something about the familiarity of it all. The same waitress, same faded jukebox, same wobbly stool by the window, made her feel like the world hadn't completely moved on without her. We didn't exchange numbers that day, just stories. She told me how she used to paint when she was younger, that she missed who she used to be before life got so quiet. I told her about my father's books, how he used to underline passages and write thoughts in the margins. Little conversations with himself I was now trying to understand. When I left, I didn't expect to see her again, but I did, the next Saturday, and the one after that, until it stopped being coincidence and quietly became something else. Our love didn't arrive like a storm. It came like early spring, slow, hesitant, full of quiet hope. There were no grand confessions, no sweeping gestures, just the way she reached for my hand during long drives, her thumb tracing gentle circles, or how she'd hum softly while cooking, sometimes turning to offer me a taste straight from the spoon. We lived in the small spaces most people overlook, folding laundry together, grocery shopping at odd hours, sitting on the back porch in silence, just watching the sky change color. That was our rhythm. Unspoken, unforced. She made my place feel like home, moved in slowly, like sunlight filling a room. One drawer at a time, one shared toothbrush holder, one favorite coffee mug on the top shelf. She had this way of remembering the little things. How I liked my eggs, which sock I always lost, the song I hummed when I didn't realize I was doing it. And I tried to be her calm. The one who held her during the nights she woke up from dreams she wouldn't talk about. But underneath all that softness, we were both carrying pieces we hadn't figured out where to place. She wanted roots. I kept chasing movement. She liked Sunday mornings. I liked late-night projects. We loved each other, but we were healing at different speeds. Still, there were moments that felt like a promise. I remember one rainy Tuesday. We danced barefoot in the living room, the hardwood floor slick and cold. She laughed, really laughed, and for a second, the world outside that window didn't exist. It was just us. Two people who had been strangers once, now tangled in something too quiet to name, but too deep to ignore. I didn't know then how temporary it would be, how even the most beautiful silences can unravel if you're not paying attention. The unraveling didn't happen in one sharp moment. No slammed doors, no screaming matches, just little shifts, almost invisible, like hairline cracks in glass you don't notice until light hits them just right. She stopped humming while she cooked. I stopped asking where she'd like to go on Sunday drives. We still moved through the motions. Coffee at 7, dinner at 6, her hand brushing mine as she passed the salt. But it all felt thinner, like the fabric of us was wearing down, and we didn't know how to patch it without making it worse. It wasn't that we stopped loving each other. It's that love stopped being the loudest thing in the room. She started spending more time in the garden. Said the soil helped her stay grounded. I believed her, but I also saw how often she looked at the door before going out there, as if waiting for me to follow. I didn't. I buried myself in work, told myself I was building something, that progress needed time and attention. But I think part of me was just avoiding the look in her eyes, soft but distant, like she was watching us from a far-off shore. We went away for a weekend in late September. Rented a little cabin in the mountains. No Wi-Fi. Just pine trees, firewood, and the sound of wind like breath through tall grass. It should have been healing, but it only made the silence between us louder. One evening, we sat on the porch, wrapped in separate blankets, staring out at nothing. She held a cup of tea close to her lips, but didn't drink. I remember the steam rising, curling into the night air like it too, wanted to escape. I think we're growing in different directions, she said softly. No accusation, no tears, just truth. I didn't respond right away, not because I disagreed, but because I didn't know how to say, I feel it too, and I'm scared that naming it will make it real. Instead, I reached for her hand. She let me hold it, but her fingers didn't close around mine. They rested there, open, still. That night, she slept facing the wall. And I lay awake watching the ceiling, wondering how something so gentle could hurt so deeply. We left the cabin the next morning. She packed quietly. I watched her fold her clothes with the same care she once used folding mine. We didn't speak much on the drive home. Somewhere along Route 15, I glanced over at her and thought, we're not broken. We're just done being what we were. But neither of us wanted to be the one to say it out loud. Not yet. Sometimes the end doesn't announce itself. It just waits, quietly, until you're ready to listen. It didn't end in the way you'd expect. There was no official goodbye, no final talk on the porch with tears and closure, no suitcase by the door, no slammed screen. Just a Tuesday. Cloudy, unremarkable. I had gone to the store for groceries. I remember the list in my pocket, still warm from my hand. Milk, rosemary, dish soap. When I came back, the house was exactly as I'd left it, and yet she was gone. Her shoes weren't by the door. The denim jacket she always tossed on the coat hook, gone. The mug with the tiny chip on the rim, the one she used every morning, missing from the drying rack. But the lights were off. The bed was made. Even the blanket on the couch had been folded neatly, the way she always folded it, edges aligned, corners tucked. There was a note on the kitchen table. Not dramatic, not handwritten, just a printed page, typed, simple font. No greeting, no signature. Just this. You gave me a quiet I didn't know I needed. And in return, I hope I gave you a part of yourself back. I think we held each other as long as we could. Maybe that's enough. I read it twice, then 3 times. But my eyes kept drifting, not to the words, but to the empty chair across from me. I imagined what she might have said if she'd stayed, if she'd let the silence breathe just a little longer. I don't know how to stop caring, she might have whispered, but I also don't know how to keep loving you while I feel so alone. And maybe I would have replied. I was trying. I just didn't know how to try the right way anymore. But no words were spoken. And maybe that was her final kindness, leaving without forcing a scene, without turning pain into something loud. I checked the drawer where she kept her paints. Empty. The garden gloves were gone too. But in the fridge, she'd left a Tupperware container of my favorite stew, labeled with the date. That was her way, always thinking of the little things. I sat on the floor for a long time that afternoon, not crying, not angry, just quiet, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, watching the way the afternoon light came through the blinds and stripes, dust catching in its path. People think the end of a relationship is a moment, a fight, a confession. But sometimes it's just an absence you can feel in your bones. Like when a familiar song plays, but the harmony is missing. I called her once that night, let it ring 3 times, hung up. I didn't know what I would have said if she answered. Maybe nothing. Maybe just, "Are you okay?" But I think I knew, deep down, she had already let go long before she walked out the door. She'd been slowly stepping back, piece by piece, gesture by gesture, and I had watched it happen without knowing how to stop it. The next morning, the house felt colder, not just in temperature, but in spirit. The kind of cold that settles in the walls and stays. And still, I loved her. Still do, in a quiet way. The kind of love that doesn't ask to be returned. The kind that simply thanks someone, even as they leave. The days that followed were slow. Not sad, just muted, like the world had turned down its volume. I kept her mug in the cabinet for a while, not out of hope, but respect. It stayed there between the chipped bowl and the wine glass she never used, like a quiet witness to something we once were. The garden she loved went untended that fall. The basil wilted. The marigolds browned early, but I left them be. I couldn't bring myself to replace them. They were hers, and I didn't want to rewrite that space. Not yet. I still heard her sometimes. Not in voice, but in patterns. The creak of the hallway at dusk. The way the wind moved the curtain at 3 a.m., soft and slow, like her breath used to be against my shoulder. At the market, I started skipping the peach stand, not because it hurt, but because some scents are just too full, too much memory packed into too small a moment. I didn't tell many people about the ending, not because I was ashamed. There was no shame in it, but because there are love stories that don't make good headlines, the kind that grow quietly, fade gently, and still change you forever. There was no one to blame, no villain, just time, tenderness, and timing. Three things that almost aligned. Almost. I began filling my evenings with small things, reading old journals, learning to cook again, walking by the lake without needing a destination. The silence she left behind didn't feel empty anymore. It felt lived in, like an old coat you wear on chilly days. Not flashy, but familiar. Worn in all the right places. And that's how it was. We met as strangers, loved as something more, and left as strangers once again. Only this time, with a softness between us, a quiet ache, a shared, unspoken thank you that never needed to be said aloud. It's strange, the way love lingers. Not like a ghost, exactly, but like the warmth left in a chair after someone stood up. Gone, but not entirely. For a while, I still caught myself saving the last slice of pie. Still checked the mirror before dinner like she'd be across the table, eyes narrowing at the collar I always left crooked. Habits outlast people, sometimes. So does love, in its own quiet way. I found her scarf one afternoon, tucked in the back of the coat closet, still carried the faint scent of lavender and wood smoke. I didn't cry. I just held it for a moment, then folded it gently and placed it in a drawer I rarely open. Some things don't need to be out in the open to be kept close. Friends asked if I was dating again. I told them no, not yet. It wasn't about comparison or fear or bitterness. It was just, I wasn't ready to share my quiet with someone new. Not when it still echoed with her voice. Instead, I poured myself into the little rituals we once shared. Morning walks, record player humming in the background while I read, making her stew recipe on cold nights, even though I always oversalt it. In time, the house didn't feel haunted. It felt spacious, like something was making room. For what, I didn't know. But I no longer rushed to fill the silence. I let it breathe. Once, I passed her on the sidewalk. Months later. She wore a green coat I'd never seen before, and her hair was shorter. She looked happy, not radiant, not exuberant, just settled, the way trees look when they've stopped reaching for more and have simply learned to hold the sky. We nodded. No words. And somehow, that said everything. Some stories don't need a second chapter. Sometimes, the first one is whole enough. And maybe love isn't always meant to last. Maybe it's just meant to teach us how deeply we can feel before we learn how to stand in our own stillness again. I used to think love was something you either fought for or let slip away, like a treasure you either kept tightly in your hands or lost forever when the winds turned cold. But now, I see it differently. Love, I've come to understand, is less about possession and more about presence. When she left, I was left with this quiet space, a silence so full, it almost whispered. At first, I didn't know how to bear it. It felt like a wound, as if something was missing and I needed to fill it fast. But slowly, I began to realize that the emptiness wasn't something that needed to be fixed. It was simply a part of me now. A space that wasn't vacant, but open. Like the space in a flower just before it blooms. In the months that followed, I learned that letting go doesn't mean erasing. I can still love her without needing to hold on. I can still carry the warmth of what we shared, even though she's no longer here in the same way. That's what true love is, isn't it? The ability to love without attachment, to be grateful for what was, and accept what is. There's a lesson in every ending. The lesson I've learned is that nothing, not even love, is permanent. Everything shifts, and that's okay. It doesn't mean we're weaker or that we failed. It just means we're alive. We're part of something bigger, something constantly moving, always evolving. The love I had for her didn't die when she left. It transformed. It became a memory that I visit, like an old friend. And in that memory, I've found peace. Not because it wasn't hard, but because I've come to understand that holding on is never as powerful as letting go. The way the river flows past the rocks, the way the sun sets without asking for permission. Sometimes the most beautiful parts of life are the ones we can't control. We love and we learn, and then we let go, trusting that the heart can expand to hold more than we thought possible. There's a chair on the porch that's always empty now. But every time the wind moves the curtain, I glance up, not in longing, just out of memory. Maybe you have something like that too. A place, a scent, a name that echoes only when the room goes quiet. We don't always need to answer the ache. Sometimes we just need to sit beside it. Pause. If this story stayed with you, maybe it's because you've also been carrying a song that never quite ended, and that's okay. Some melodies don't fade. They just wait until we're ready to hear them again.